three periods. How do they pertain to the development of Gold Coast through Ghana? Though the above are three separate events, they are somehow connected and they serve as an antecedent to the other.
Zoom meeting. No, my market with Okabo to sell, but that it ain't try seller.
Try and mute please mute your mic.
Priscilla, please mute.
You're thinking about.
The first speaker will delve into history and how three diabolical acts, which is slave trade, colonialism, and neocolonialism, connect to the other. Why and how the cumulative effect persists. How the current state capture was engineered and managed. He will follow up with the quality of leadership in Ghana, how they are affected. He will also talk about motivated reasoning in political decision-making in Ghana and the effect on quality of life of Ghanaians. The second speaker will speak on the psychosocial effect of slavery, colonialism, and neocolonialism, how they've impacted on lives and continue to influence our lives. Third speaker will touch on the solutions to these three diabolical acts. So who are these speakers? Number one, speaker one is Dr. George Kojo Arthur, PhD. He's a executive director, Center for Indigenous Knowledge Systems in Accra. He used to be a lecturer at the Marshall University in USA. Currently, he's in Ghana, enjoying the sun every day, and whilst we freeze to death here. He's got several publications, and next time I'll have the time to go through all because we are against time. The second speaker is Thad Olsen. He's a MD and Associate Dean for Academic Affairs and Chair of Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Science, Medical Students Affairs and Psychiatry and Behavioral Medicine in Behavioral Medicine, University of Alabama. He is an annual visiting professor, University of Cape Coast, School of Medical Sciences. Our third speaker is Brother Eugene, also a PhD, Associate Department Head, Department of Teacher Education, College of Education and Human Services, Valdosta State University in Georgia. Ladies and gentlemen, this is how the whole process is going to go. We're going to have session one, which is we'll talk about slavery, slave trade, and after the main speaker has finished, Dr. Olsen will come in and talk about psychosocial effect of the problem, and then from there, Dr. Asola will give us the solutions. From there, we'll move to the next stage, which is colonialism, and then we'll talk about the same sequence, and then we move to neocolonialism, which is the current state. And so at this point, I'll invite our first speaker, Dr. George Arthur, to start the process.
On mute.
I'm trying to do. Okay. I would like to share my screen with you because I have a PowerPoint presentation. So if the host will allow me to share.
Sure, definitely.
The host still hasn't allowed me. Okay. If we are going to talk about slave trade, colonialism, neocolonialism, I need to make it clear that our history doesn't start from these events. We had a history long before Europeans came in contact with us, particularly those of us on the West African coast. Before the Europeans came to our West African coast, we had been participating in the trans-Saharan trade, whereby towns like Guinea in present-day Mali and Techiman in present-day Ghana were part of the important towns on the trade routes. And before the Europeans came into, Africa had been referred to as a continent of wisdom. And places like Timbuktu and others were centers of learning. Timbuktu had the University of Sankore, which was one of the great universities established by the Muslims. So coming into slave trade wasn't just something that just dropped out of the sky. We did exist. We did have history. And slave trade even was preceded by the Europeans coming in through their explorations, led by the Portuguese particularly, who first established a foothold in present-day Ghana in the town called Elmina by building a castle there. And this castle was built as what we will refer to in modern days as a shopping mall. Or those days, they called it a port factory, where they came in with their goods, traded with us, bought our goods, and stored these goods until their ships came and carried these goods away. And prominent in this trade was trade in cloth. For example, my research on Kente and Dinkra cloth production in Ghana indicates that we did produce different types of cloths in Ghana, in Ivory Coast, in present-day Senegal. And when the Portuguese came along the West African coast, they will buy these different fabrics from the different places and come to Ghana, buy what they could get from Ghana too, and move on to trade among the African countries. These fabrics that were produced in Senegal, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Nigeria, Cameroon, and so on. And research on Kente, for instance, indicates that through the trans-Saharan trade, our chiefs got to buy a fabric, they call it nsa. So there's the expression, "Nia onim nsa no oto nego." That is the one who doesn't know the genuine nsa cloth will buy the fake one. Nsa was made from camel hair, and present day, our chiefs will line their palanquins with this nsa cloth. It's a very heavy, thick blanket. And oftentimes it's made into checkered patterns. So there was trade among us on the West African coast. And then the Europeans came in and carried on this trade. And when later on the Dutch, for instance, came in, they carried textile designs all the way to Indonesia, where the Indonesians knew how to do batik. And the Indonesians incorporated this batik system. And then later on, the Dutch learned to do the wax print and came back with these designs and traded these textiles among us, so that present day, when you have textiles, which some call Dumas and all those things by Unilever and other textile companies, the roots come from our people doing their designs and the Europeans taking our designs to Indonesia and mixing this up And then Europeans later on, during the Industrial Revolution, mechanized the process of textile making, and therefore were able to bring in cheaper textiles and destroy our textile industry. But having set foothold in Africa by building forts and castles and carried on trade along the West African coast, then the explorations went on to not only extend European influence around the Cape to India and so on, but then they also came to what is now called the New World. When they came to the New World, they thought they had found the sea route to the east. So they called it the West Indies. And what started this exploration was the rise of the Ottoman Empire, right in the middle of Asia and Europe, that blocked or took control over the trade between Europe and the Far East. The explorations were done to find an alternate route to the Far East without going through the Ottoman controlled areas. And why they built so many forts and castles in Ghana particularly is that Africa generally doesn't have indentations along the coast inland whereby ships can move away from the ocean.
Can people mute their distance? Please mute.
Okay.
Who is Huawei Wi-Fi Prime? Please mute your speaker.
Okay, so
thank you.
Ghana happened to have several bays, which in essence served as a form of natural harbor for these European sailing ships to find a safe docking place away from the main ocean and the current and the winter from the main ocean. So that's why Ghana happens to have so many forts and castles along our coast. And these were done long before slave trade came in, so that the Europeans were competing against each other to have a foothold on our coast, to the extent that when you go to Commander, just across the lagoon from Akatechi, and you go eastward, you come to Kankan, which is the Dutch commander. Akatechi is the British commander, and the Dutch had their fort at Kankan, and the British had their fort at Akatechi. And interestingly, when the Dutch and the British were fighting in Europe, Akatechi and Kankan people will also be fighting among themselves in support of their European friends or European powers that had built the forts there. You see something similar to Solpon, at Solpon, Komante, Abandi. They're not that far apart, but each of them had their own forts and castles because the Europeans wanted a foothold to be able to participate in the trade with Africa. And meanwhile, while they built the forts and castles along the coast, they were not interested in penetrating to find out more about the hinterland of Africa. And Africa that once was referred to as the continent of wisdom, all of a sudden became known as the dark continent.
Mm. So how did this translate into the slave trade? And how did the slave trade disrupt things, the beautiful setup that you've just listed? The
Yes.
slave trade is our main.
Yes, I'm coming to that. Having established these forts and castles for trading purposes, all of a sudden, the Portuguese started enslaving Africans from Cape Verde Islands and close to Mauritania. And the Catholic Church, which was behind the Portuguese as well as the Spanish, immediately gave justification for enslaving Africans for the plantation work that the Portuguese had started. So that when by a papal decree, Portugal was given control over the eastern half of the world, and Spain was given control over the Western Hemisphere. The Catholic behind the Portuguese and the Spanish justified the slave trade, that it was okay to capture people against their will, to use them to do the hard work for plantation purposes that they had begun to establish in the New World and other places that they had set foot there. So you see that they had set foot in Ghana by the Portuguese as far back as 1471. They didn't penetrate inland to establish any plantation or anything there. But because they had built these forts and castles, not only by the Portuguese, but the Danish, the Dutch, the British, all of them had their forts and castles, they all jumped into the profitable slave trading activity. And
may I ask a question?
Who is this, please?
Excuse me, my audio wasn't working. Edward Martin, I'm a loyal supporter and PhD in international law on the history of international law and the neglect of African perspectives in international law.
Great. Currently, the first speaker is on the stage. So,
sorry, I thought.
yeah, give us some time. We come to that section. That's okay. Yeah, thank you. Mr. Speaker, go ahead.
So, okay.
So, I mean, the widespread practice of buying and selling slaves was a way of turning labor into commodity. If, I mean, in the feudal system, the lords, those who had control over the land, expropriated the excess production through taxes and tithes and other things. But the capitalist development that was taking place, was rising in place of feudalism, differed because capitalists bought labor and then laid claim to the whole product of labor. So if they traded in slaves, then they had the slaves as captives to use their labor for productive activities that they will have control over. So the slaves were not free landholders or that could produce and then pay tithes on the land, but whatever the slave labor could be used to produce belonged to the slave owner.
Thank you. You have a minute to wind up, please.
Okay, so this was an absolutely crucial difference that shifted the role of private property right to the very center of social relations. And no system relied on strong private property claims more than slavery did. So slavery was having private property rights over the slave that you owned. And the forts and castles that they had built along the coast shifted from centers of trading in goods into centers of trading in people. And that is where domestic slavery differs from the chattel slavery, where people owned you as a person and whatever you produce belonged to them. And this slave trade then, which existed between 16th and 19th century, led to depopulation of areas where the slave raiders raided. Villages and places were destroyed, people were taken away, and that led to descaling, transfer of technology. For instance, when you come to New Orleans, Louisiana area, African slaves were brought in with the skills in rice production to produce rice in the wetlands of Louisiana. So that's an example of a transfer of skills and technology from Africa to the New World. It also led to intensification of religious and educational indoctrination, and then the introduction of mass consumerism, because when they produce sugar and textiles in the New World and brought that to Europe, to the industries that they had, they were able to produce things more cheaply than we could produce ourselves, and therefore destroyed our industries. And the slave trade then also helped to intensify inter-ethnic wars. Prior to the Europeans coming to our coast in Ghana, for example, there was a trans-Saharan trade, and therefore those who were in the forest belt area had more control over the forest products that they had to transact with the traders coming from across the Sahara. But when the Europeans came to the coast, there was the redirection of the geography of trade from the south to the north to the north to the south. That is, before Europeans came, there was a trade from the southern areas to North Africa. But then the Europeans came to redirect this trade so that trade then came from the north to the south. And those who were in the middle belt, for example, in Ghana, wanted more control over the trade that had come to the coast, and that intensified inter-ethnic wars. And the rise of Asante is an example where Asante wanted to come from
we are getting to the end. Dr. Arthur, we are getting to the end, so
okay,
please. Yeah.
So these are examples of what slave trade did to us in particularly in Ghana, and I will link this on to what happened on the colonialism and then neo-colonialism later on.
Fantastic, thank you so much. We've all heard what the slave trade, how it began and how it was intensified and all that, with even the complicities of the church and all that. At this point, let's move on to the second speaker, Dr. Thad Ozen, who will talk about the psychosocial effects of slavery. Dr. Thad, please.
The slave trade.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be fairly brief because we will have other segments, and
we will sort of tie the concepts together as we move on. The first question, of course, I have in relation to this is the question that we all have to keep in our minds is that who writes the story?
Mm-hmm.
Because who writes the story of the slave trade? The person who writes the story of the slave trade will, of course, be interested in rationalizing it, and in some cases, even romanticizing it, as we see in the American side of the story, where Americans have led a lie of the plantations were one big happy family, so that the population does not really have a sense of what happened. But at the center of slavery, Dr. Arthur talked a bit about sort of other relationships of servitude. Relationships of servitude have been present throughout history. You know, throughout history, there have been servants, slaves, however you call them, serving wealthier classes in society. But what is particularly unique about the slave trade was the degree of dehumanization that was involved in the conditions of servitude. That is, to be able to bundle people up, chain them, pack them into small rooms in what you know, we've called these things castles, but I think that they should simply be called glorified dungeons. That's what they are. Again, the presenter of the history from the West will give it a nice name, like this is a castle or this is a fort. But these were prisons and dungeons. That's essentially what they were. So people are dehumanized because you need to dehumanize the person before you can treat them as you would treat an animal. So that is the first thing. That our people were dehumanized and then shipped along all the way to the Western Hemisphere. Now, at the center of this is a very interesting dilemma, because the West has generally tried to divide Africans on both sides of the ocean, where the Atlantic Ocean. They will tell the African American that, look, you know, you're very lucky to be here, because if you were not here, you may have been eaten up by a lion or something in Africa anyway. And look at how you're living in an advanced society, and if you were in Africa, you would be in a less advanced society. So this kind of method is used to turn Black people against each other. And at the center of it is that the Black person in the Western Hemisphere looks at the African and says to the African, you know, you're not really with me because you sold me, and that's why I'm here, which is the Western version of the story. So at the center of this is really psychological trauma. On the plantations, the trauma of dehumanization, physical brutality, long hours of work, no remuneration, abuse of women, all of these things are part of the experience on the American side. Now, the best way to describe the situation, the psychological situation on the African side, is really a trauma of loss. So, I mean, the best way to do this is, I had a conversation with an African-American friend of mine who threw in well, you know, you people sold us. And I said, well, that's what you've been told. But really, you have to consider that on the African side, somebody came home and his father was gone. Mm-hmm. Or somebody came home and his wife was not there. Somebody came home and his child was not there. So that the trauma of the plantation economy, yes, was on this side, but the trauma of loss is what was faced on the African side. Mm-hmm. So that this is really a shared traumatic experience with different facets. Mm-hmm. And the sooner Africans and African descendants sort of put the picture together, the sooner it becomes possible for them to see this shared traumatic experience as something that they should be working together to heal as a race of people. So I think that I will leave it there at this point so that we consider the question of psychological trauma and how that plays into the next phase of colonialism and neocolonialism. I'll just leave that thought with you for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ozen. The third speaker, Brother Asola and Dr. Asola, could you please share with us how best we can, flatten the curve in that regard to lessen the the trauma of loss that we are Africans, but we've been made to understand that we are enemies. What are some of the solutions that we can put in place to help solve this trauma?
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be part of this conversation. I just like my colleague and mentor just mentioned, in order for me to present a full account of what we need to be doing, which is going to be based on education. The quality of life is related to quality of education. And as we all know, education is based on the curriculum. And so all these, the colonialism, neocolonialism, and all what has been mentioned by Dr. Atta and Dr. Olsen, I would want to kind of summarize or put all together when they are done, because it has to do with one thing, curriculum. And then I would enumerate that further, because that is what I think.
Okay.
Great.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, that's great. So before we go to the second segment, do we engage each other on discussion, or we should complete everything?
No, this complete.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So at this stage, I will invite Dr. Atta again to go into neocolonialism, the history and
Colonialism.
colonialism. Thank you, Dr. Thad. Colonialism and brief history and how the leadership it's affected leadership of our continent and our country, and their decision-making process and the quality of life for Ghanaians. Thank you, Dr. Atta.
Unmute, Dr. Atta.
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier on, the Portuguese, for instance, built a castle at Elmina around about 1471. But it was not until 1894 or thereabout that the European powers sat at Berlin at a conference to draw up lines on the map of Africa to carve up Africa as areas of influence or territories or colonies for those European powers. And interestingly, at the Berlin conference, as attendants and not active participants in the share of the booty, were United States and Turkey. So United States has always been interested in Africa, but earlier on they left Africa as the sphere of influence for Europe, whereas United States took care of the New World and South America. So that later on, for instance, you had the Monroe Doctrine specifying that South America, East Indies, West Indies, Central America, constituted the sphere of influence of United States. But at the Berlin conference, they were there as attendants, if not active participants at all. So they've always been interested in Africa. And the colonial era, as I said, can be tied to the Berlin Conference division of Africa into areas of influence of European countries led to cessation of inter-ethnic wars. Again, if I'm to use Ghana as an example, the inter-ethnic wars that saw the rise of Asante, for instance, was ended when the British had effective control over Ghana in the 1874 war, which is called the Sovereignty War. Okay, and for the first time, Britain is able to penetrate into Kumasi and destroy Kumasi totally. So that later on in 1896, they came back and decided to ask for the golden stool to be presented to them for the representative of the Queen to sit on, which led to the Yasantua War. Asante had basically been controlled by the British. So taking their chief and deporting him to first Sierra Leone and later on to Seychelles was to physically show to people that they were in control. And in taking control by establishing these colonies, then saw the rise or the intensification of the missionary work to indoctrinate us and justify why the Europeans were in our places. The civilizing mission that occurred during the colonial era. And you also saw the either the indirect rule of the British or the assimilation policy of the French, for instance, that France saw it to it that the territories on their control in Africa saw themselves as French people and not as African people, to the extent that up to now, in some of the former French territories, they don't have the local languages taught in their schools as we teach our local languages in our schools. And the indirect rule of the British, for instance, or the assimilation policy of the French led to what I would call the creation of tin gods, so that the Europeans then undermined the local authorities. If you are to be recognized as a chief of your area, you have to be affirmed by the European power. So currently, even in Ghana, we have our chiefs, when they are elected, they have to be gazetted. And gazetting comes from the colonial era, okay? And the colonial era also saw, if they ended slave trade, then they substituted the labor conscription laws. And they also introduced a tax system whereby you were required to pay taxes to support any infrastructure development that will take place in your area. And meanwhile, the infrastructure development was not meant for the development of the area. It was to enhance the moving away of our resources to Europe, to help industrialize Europe and deindustrialize our territories. And the labor conscription laws, for example, in Ghana, went on to about 1926, whereby the 1926 ordinance indicated, this is in Ghana, that north of Kintampo, the British were not going to put a penny in the development of territory north of Kintampo. And the territory north of Kintampo is the present-day northern Ghana, northern Upper East, Upper West, and the new regions that have been created were all north of Kintampo, and the British were not going to put a penny into the development of such area. And now you see the lagging behind of the northern part of Ghana as compared to the southern part of Ghana. This was part of the colonial policy of keeping the north as a labor pool for conscripting labor to work in the mines and public works projects that saw to the building of roads and railways and all that. And interestingly, the labor conscription law also brought into it the idea of within Ghana, Northerners being seen as not as developed or as civilized, if I may use that term, as the Southerners. Why? When they were brought into the mining areas, most of the underground mining work was reserved for Northerners. So that when you go to Obuasi or Prisia or Takwa, Abontiakun, for instance, near Takwa, the underground labor in the mines were usually Northerners. Even in Samraboy, for instance, which was a timber company town, much of the dangerous, risky jobs in the sawmill were reserved for Northerners. Okay, and again, the colonial system brought in its wake, after they had ended the slave trade or trade in human beings, the intensification of trade in the production of agricultural raw materials like palm oil, groundnuts, rubber, coconuts, and other things. And these products, that some of which had been produced locally for domestic consumption, became commodities that were traded and taken away to Europe, so that when people were moved from their areas, say in the north to the south, then they had no land to produce food of their own, and they therefore had to buy food to survive, and therefore they had to participate in the trade of buying and selling food items, for example. And this was also the time that the British and other colonial powers introduced European currency into our system in place of indigenous currencies that we use in trade before the Europeans took control. In Ghana, for example, we had used cola nuts, cowrie shells, and gold dust. Gold dust was the highest form of currency to the extent that in Ashanti, for example, in Kejetia and Asafo markets, you couldn't use any currency to buy and sell in those two markets other than gold dust. But a trade using gold dust, for instance, was brought to an end in 1912 by the British, so that we could be forced to use the currency that they had introduced. And that saw the rise of banking institutions. Since money was going to be brought from Europe to participate in the trade or to be used in buying goods and other things, they introduced the pound sterling currency into our system. And the Dempster Shipping Agency was the shipping line that brought in the money, particularly the coins, during the cocoa season, and therefore became interested in having control over the distribution of the currency. And they rose in opposition to Lever Brothers, the present day Unilever in Ghana, when Lever Brothers sought to control banking in Ghana.
Dr. Arthur, can you please round it up for me, please?
Okay, and that led to the setting up of the Bank of British West Africa, the present day Standard Bank, Standard Chartered Bank of Ghana. And then later on, Barclays Bank came in. We'll come to talk about Ghana Commercial Bank later on. But the colonial period also saw the intensification of the incorporation of our economy into the global system. And they promoted the export of agricultural products like cocoa, palm oil, and so on. And mineral production intensified. And infrastructure development, railway construction, for instance, in Ghana, was not then to develop Ghana, but railways construction was to help mechanize the mining of gold underground. They needed heavy equipment to take to the mines, and Ghana didn't have the use of animals, draft animals for transportation, and human beings' head portrait wasn't good enough to carry the heavy equipment. So they put in a railway line and they started the first construction from Sekendi Takoradi to Takwa and later on to Obuasi. And then after the 1874 destruction of Kumasi, they extended it to Kumasi, and then they built the Accra-Kumasi railway line too. So we see during the colonial period, some infrastructure development like Takoradi Harbour, Achimota College, and the Kolebu Hospital, and European Hospital in Takoradi, for example. And then the promotion of new crops, the establishment of Aburi Botanical Gardens was to enhance the promotion of the growing of new crops in Ghana for the external trade. Okay, I'll stop here and then continue later on.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Atta. We believe the Berlin Conference, the loss of local languages in our own land, the creation of tin gods and introduction of tax systems to help themselves but not us, I think they have some cycle effects. So at this point, I'll invite Dr. Ozen to share some light on it, please.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think that probably the best way to complement what Dr. Arthur has just presented is to advance the idea that in all of this, essential to all of what Dr. Arthur has described, was central to it was racism. Racism, which we are still dealing with across the world as Black people. But central to this was racism, because all of those structures that were set up to deplete the country required people who were skilled. And in the colonial era, a Black person, a Gold Coaster, who did the same job as a white person, was not given the same rank and was also not given the same pay. So I think that this is something that needs to be understood, that whilst we're being exploited on the land, the people themselves were also being exploited. But colonialism brought with it the need, the urge of resistance, because people now started realizing that they actually were losing their country, their kingdoms, etc., to the Europeans in a very organized way. And to understand you know, how it affected people, well, people had to find different ways to resist. And as Frantz Fanon would say in The Wretched of the Earth, that violence was necessary to take the colonialists out. Violence, you know, could be, in Ghana's experience, was mostly through boycotts and positive action, as we remember it. But in the mind of the colonized person, the biggest problem was identity. Identity. Because in order to succeed within the colonial era, you had to sort of Europeanize yourself to be able to advance. So in colonized people, there was something called a double consciousness. Your true consciousness as a Black person and your developing consciousness as an Europeanized intellectual. And this was an internal conflict that people dealt with a great deal. And you still see it in many aspects of Ghanaian society. The other psychological notion was that even though you were angry with the colonial master, you muted your anger by identifying with them. So, you know, people talk proudly about standing at a rediffusion box during Empire Day and standing at attention listening to King George V from England. You know, that's an example of identification with the aggressor. At one level, you hate them for taking things away from you, but at another level, you sort of identify with their power that controls you. So, you know, so these are some of the issues that we struggle with. And that double consciousness, again, Fanon writes in his first book called Black Skin, White Mask, which I think is essential reading for understanding the psychological impact of colonialism. And then, of course, The Wretched of the Earth, which most people are familiar with. But central to Fanon's thinking is that the pathway out of the psychological impact of colonialism was for these artificial countries to begin to develop a national culture. And through the national culture, to develop a national consciousness as a strategy for combating the mental effects of colonialism. So this, you know, this insecurity really begins to affect the identity of people. And as Dr. Arthur said, in the French colonies, they were told, you know, actively to assimilate, to see themselves as French people. In the British colonies, it was a bit more laissez-faire, and you were left yourself to see that the more British you became, the more successful you would be in the society. So these were ways in which colonialism began to affect the minds of Africans, where we started to diminish anything that was African, to find ways to denigrate anything that was African, and to begin to identify with what was British, anything that was British, whether it was the manner of speaking, manner of dressing, how you educated yourself, that was seen as a way to advance oneself. And I'll give you again an anecdote. I remember when I was in sixth form, there was a chemistry book that we used called Lambert, which was from England. And it was the book that had been used for many years. But in that particular year, we also got a book from the United States called Sienko, written by the authors called Sienko and Plain. And even at that level, if you were reading Sienko and Plain, people came to you and said, oh, as for the American book, it's not good, you have to read the British one. You know, so even in the 70s, long after independence, in sixth form in GSDS, we had internalized the idea that anything that was British was good. Of course, I had a retort to the person, and I asked him whether the British had sent any spaceship to the moon yet to show us their greatness. Anyway, I'll leave you with that thought as well. Thank you.
Great, fantastic. I can't wait to see the final showdown after the presentations. Right. So since we cannot go to the third speaker right now, we'll go back to the first speaker, Dr. Arthur. If you can talk about neocolonialism, we know how Dr. Nkrumah talked about how the West is going to come after us, clandestinely, without we knowing that they are here. Their schemes are big and wide. If you can please elaborate on how they got in there, their schemes and all that, how they are using their tactics, to make us ineffective, to make us irrelevant and all those things. That would be greatly appreciated. Dr. Arthur, please.
We talked about how they came into trade, had a foothold, and then eventually drew up lines and said that this is my area and all that. And as Tad had just said, we became aware that they were, taking us for a song, and that we had to fight back. And some of the resistance in Ghana, for instance, was undertaken by cocoa farmers. They organized cocoa boycotts. The biggest one was 1938, whereby the rich cocoa farmers bought the produce from the small farmers and burnt the cocoa beans rather than sell to the Awam companies. And Awam is an association of West African merchants. And when we say the word Awam, everybody understands it. It's not a Twi word, it's not a Gan word, it's not a Ewe word, but it comes from Association of West African Merchants. That wherever these companies operated, Awam wom, and we resisted by not selling our produce to them. And then the other resistance was the boycott led by the Osala Tamanche king. What's his name? I'm sorry, I've forgotten his name. Bonte. Okay. He organized a boycott of the foreign companies. And this boycott was taking place at British Accra, Jamestown, present-day Jamestown, Accra, and around the Usherford area. And the boycott was to end February 28, 1948. And that was the same day that the ex-servicemen who had served in the Second World War marched on the castle to present a petition that the promises to take care of them after the war had not been fulfilled. And shooting broke out, and 3 ex-servicemen died. And when the news spread to the boycotters at Jamestown, rioting, looting started. And this spread to other cities. And one outcome of this rioting was the creation of Ghana National College at Cape Coast. We're not getting into that. But neocolonialism, as Krobeduse expressed it nicely, he said neocolonialism is that Kwesi Broni says he's gone, yet he's at the edge of the town, taking control over what's going on in town. Okay, the colonial masters indicate to us that they have given us our independence, yet they control our economy, they control decision making. And a good example of external control of decision making occurred during the reign of Busia. Bouzier government worked with the Boston-based group called the Harvard Economic Economic Advisory Group. They were based in Boston. They had nothing to do with Harvard University, but they were CIA front, and they worked with the World Bank. And under NLC, they had been there advising the NLC regime. And during the reign of Bouzier, they moved boldly to have control over decision-making in Ghana, to the extent that one of the Harvard Advisory Group members was in the office of the Prime Minister. One was in the office of the Minister of Economic Planning and Finance. One was at the Bank of Ghana. There were 6 of them. One of them is called Tony Killick, if anybody has heard of Tony Killick. Okay, and they met with the cabinet, met as 6 group people, and made decisions. And each time they went to meet with the cabinet, their decisions are carried through. And to the extent that when the debate came over whether to devalue the CD currency or not, the whole thing was like J.H. Mensah versus the rest of them. And that time, J.H. Frimpong was the governor of the Bank of Ghana. He was on that economic advisory group side. And when J.H. Mensah argued that for devaluation to be more effective, the devaluation rate must be high, they came back and said, no. If it was too high, the impact will be too severe on people and people will resist. So the devaluation rate should be lower. And Prime Minister Bouzier then took over the Ministry of Finance and gave the Ministry of Economic Planning to J.H. Mensah, so that Bouzier, as Minister of Finance, announced the devaluation policy. And as soon after he announced this, he went over to Britain for medical attention and never came back. Okay. Another example of neocolonial control over our economy has been done through what they call the structural adjustment program that started from 1983 under Rawlings. And World Bank, IMF, or what they call the Washington Consensus, has been the spearhead of decision-making in the country. They basically tell us what to do, to the extent that 60% of our budget comes from within Ghana, and the remaining 40% comes from, quote, donor countries. These are not donors. Donor is somebody who gives away some. These are people who hold onto you with the 40% that they give to you. It's like you live with your parents, or you live by yourself, but then your parents contribute 40% of your budget. Definitely your parents will tell you how to spend your money. And that's, in essence, is what I will describe as neocolonialism. They control, and they control us by insisting on certain things that are actually inimical to our interests. For example, Cocoa Marketing Board has been a very successful public system to be involved in the purchase and marketing of cocoa. Yet World Bank, IMF insist that we privatize Cocoa Marketing Board. And by the way, Cocoa Marketing Board was set up by the British. And why did the British set it up? This was a very clever way to get control over the export of our cocoa produce, so that they could then capture the foreign currency out of the marketing of cocoa. After the Second World War, the British had their economy destroyed completely, and they had to rebuild Britain by importing from the US. Marshall Plan came in. Marshall Plan wasn't a giveaway. It was a way of helping rebuild Europe. And the European powers, France, Britain particularly, had to repay the loans that were advanced by the Americans. And to pay back, the British created what they call produce marketing boards. And in Ghana, the produce marketing board was cocoa marketing board, set up to market cocoa to the dollar area, to earn dollar. And this money was kept in the bank account of Britain. And Britain decided to borrow and pay whatever interest they deemed fit for our money. And when Nkrumah came in and started using that money to build roads, schools, and all that, people claim Nkrumah was left with so much money by the British. The British were not, I mean, Father Christmas to leave us with any money. It was our own money. And Nkrumah made sure that we took control of our money and used our money to build the schools, roads, hospitals, and undertake infrastructure.
1 minute more, 1 minute more, Dr. Arthur.
Okay. Another form of neo-colonial system is what I would say, the remnants of the colonial system of indoctrination. And you see this indoctrination in our educational system. You see this in our religious practices, and you see this in various spheres of culture. Dr. Olson mentioned wearing European clothes, to the extent that we decided to have Friday wear, and the clothing that we wear is actually imported from the Europeans. Instead of promoting, say, our kente or batakare and things of that nature, which we make locally. By the way, the kente is also made from imported yarns. So it's not wholly made in Ghana, but at least the weaving and the design and all that is Ghanaian. The importation of food ranks number 2 after petroleum products import on our budget, our importer bill. Yet we claim to be an agricultural country. We have tuna industry, but the tuna factory in Tama is basically to export, to earn foreign currency, yet we import other fish products into the country. Well, let me end here so that we can have other people contribute. And
yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, when I think about neocolonialism, it makes me so mad and boiling in my body. At this point, I will ask Dr. Olson to give us a brief social effects that are taking place on our continent and our country.
Okay. All right. Well, the mind does not respect the border between colonialism and neocolonialism. So the process of the disturbed identity just continues into the modern era. And as Dr. Arthur just mentioned, this insecurity of identity in the neo-colonial era is just hyped up, intensified consumption, which started in the colonial era. Those of us who are old enough remember consumer goods that came from England, for example, gem biscuits, Huntley and Palmer's, Christmas time. You waited for your box of Huntley and Palmer's, you know, from England. Then you knew that you were enjoying Christmas. And I remember when Pioneer biscuits started under the Nkrumah era, my grandmother would not touch Pioneer biscuits because it was made in Ghana. You know, so this is the you know, using individual consumption. I think Dr. Arthur has talked a bit at the macro level about the economy and how in the neo-colonial economy, the importation of food, you know, is so high. I mean, just your basic oral requirements depend on the former colonial power. It was like Leon Imba said at the independence of Gabon. He said, Gabon is independent, but between Gabon and France, nothing has changed. Everything goes on as before. That is the definition of neo-colonialism. So at the personal level, consumption of food, Western culture through movies, theater, Western fashion, and the advancement of Western language at the expense of local languages are the pathways in which the individual mind is controlled in the neo-colonial era. As a matter of fact, during the last election, Ghana is a very sad state, a neo-colonial state. The last American election, Google looked at which countries had the greatest interest in the outcome of the American election. And Ghanaians were far and above the country from the developed world that had the greatest interest in the American election. So we left one colonial master and are busy following one that has not colonized us but controls our economy right now. So what Nkrumah tried to do really to combat neo-colonialism, which is a really covert colonialism, was to emphasize the need for the advancement of what he called the African personality. So Nkrumah was dead on in his understanding of the psychological pathway that colonial powers continue to use to control people after they had physically left the former colonies. So I think that I will leave it there, and I believe that Dr. Asola will maybe help us through looking at the curriculum and how we can combat these problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tad. Yes, indeed, Dr. Asola can help us. He's been listening quietly for the past hour, and how to craft solutions. We are hoping to form a government in the future. How do we help our people who have been gravely affected by colonialism and neo-colonialism? So, Dr. Asola, we'll hand it over to you. Please go ahead. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much once again. And I'm not sure if I can meet the might and the speech from Dr. Atta, but I will try to approach it from the educational perspective. If a physician or a doctor makes a mistake during surgery, what happens to the patient? The patient dies. If a lawyer or an attorney makes a mistake, the client goes to jail. But if a teacher makes a mistake, it lives forever. That is where my conversation is going to be centered on as far as colonialism, neo-colonialism, and slavery. Curriculum and instruction are the most important elements in the educational process. And the teacher is at the center of this. Changes that the teachers bring to the class must enable students to learn. In our case, I will stress functional curriculum is what we need today. First, you have to look at the teacher preparation. During Nkrumah's time, our founder, Dr. Sajifor, we know that he spent a lot of money in education. He invested. And think of those teachers as at then When students graduated from middle form 4, they were skilled enough, they were knowledgeable enough to even go into the workforce. What is happening today is appalling, and it's an eyesore. Second is the type of curriculum that we need today. I'll give you an example. Yesterday I had a class. These were seniors. Southern, I have some of them black, some white. And I said, okay, this is the first time. Could you people ask me any, I know we have implicit bias and unconscious bias, or any misinformation or something that you are not sure about Africa, because that's where I come from, particularly Ghana, before we start any discussion. One of the students put up his hand and asked, do you have streets? This is 2020, and I'm not telling a lie. This is true. It happened yesterday.
I know.
So that is why I say education is key. Let me give you an example of what I saw in the recently curriculum that was designed and put forward in September of last year. The contents, in the content area, especially the history curriculum, and Mr. Atta, permit me to veer into your territory, but this is not my area, but I just try to look at some of the contents that were put in the curriculum for the purpose of this presentation. The content section is full of Eurocentric education. And the content strands, for instance, from B1 to B6, talks about Europeans in Ghana, which is even more prominently featured throughout the content. While conspicuously missing is any content on Africa, or even West Africa, or even the slave trade. B1, B6, that's primary 1 to 6. On page 4 of the same history, the curriculum content stated that demonstrate understanding of why Ghana used to be called the Gold Coast. And under the indicators and exemplars that they put there, use the internet to locate ancient Ghana Empire and the Akan Forest regions of Ghana. Now remember, this is B1, B2. Speaking of empires, without even mentioning or reference to the slave trade, like my colleagues mentioned, Songhai Empire, Mansa Kankamusa, and all the rest, they don't have any idea of even what the regions have in terms of our cultural heritage. I know somewhere along the line it's covered, but particularly here, this is where I think they should be talking about our Africa, and for that matter, the slave trade and all of Africa, to imbue in them the Africanism that we are talking about, or patriotism in Ghana. Throughout the curriculum, for instance, in the indicator 3, it states that discuss the role of Dr. J.B. Dankwa in linking the civilization of ancient Ghana Empire to the account of the forest region of Ghana. No mention is made of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, which seemed to distort the history of Ghana, and as we all know. This is B1, B6. Again, I emphasize because I said earlier on that if a teacher says something, it lives forever. And all of you can bear with me or remember what your P6 or primary 1 teacher did for you, or if anything that you can remember is an indelible mark that you carry up today, and I do. Consistent with current trends, we must offer something different, I would say, at least a working and useful curriculum. That means stakeholders must be involved in at least deciding what we should be teaching, what we should include in our curriculum. They should include parents. We should consider the geographical locations in our regions, the districts, the schools, the business and entrepreneurs. I'll offer a framework. For instance, we can go a top-down or down-top. Talk about the African history, and that will imbue in us Africanism, Pan-Africanism. History of Ghana, our patriotic values. Then we go to the regions, we go to the districts, the towns, the villages, and the homes. Or we can go from the homes upward. All subjects in the curriculum can be designed to address some of these issues that we've talked about. Why do we not have museums cited in our curriculum all over the regions so that we can have our artifacts, so that we can trace our historical roots, so that we can relate with what we teach in the curriculum? Quality of life is related to quality of education, again. And the previous speakers talked about history before Europeans arrived. I don't see anywhere in the curriculum that time has been given, or any content that will cover the trans-Saharan trade in the B1, B6, which is crucial. At least we should start introducing them to that trade, since it involves the Chiman, the Sahara trade for that matter, and some of the trade routes. We have the mosque in the north. Some of the trade routes where they stop to drink water, some of these are relatable and covered as early as B1, B6, as I see in the curriculum. Africa, the continent of wisdom. Nothing has been said about Timbuktu or the Sankore University for that matter. Europeans took over from our textiles, as I heard from Dr. Atta. So what can we do? This is something that has to be tied to the curriculum in terms of what we have, our natural resources, and how we can help build entrepreneurs, trade amongst the regions, the districts, or even the regions, and for that matter, African countries, rather than exporting everything. Putting how history can help us define our future as we look back at how it was distorted to suit Europeans and their businesses. For instance, the transfer of skills. We all know that slaves built most of the places here in the US were built by slaves. For instance, peanut butter, which is one of the staple food in the US right now, originated from Africa. So our religious and educational indoctrination should be fought from the point of view of the curriculum, what we include in our curriculum. The interethnic wars, I can say that Dr. Kwame Nkrumah did well by instituting the boarding system. The boarding system helped us, whether you came from the north, south, you were in school together, and we learned to accommodate each other. We learned from each other. We tolerated each other. Even though the West tried to divide us by starting all of these wars, the fight put up by Ya Asantua should be emphasized for that matter. Dr. Olsen mentioned about who writes the story. This is where I would ask that the historians must be very, very, very forthright and, for that matter, be critically aware of what needs to be put in books, because we don't do that. They say if you want to hide anything from a black man, put it in black and white, in writing. But I don't think that if I give credit to those who put the curriculum together, but it can be better than what it is now. That is because it was rushed. In my opinion, it was rushed. But all is not lost. We can still do better than that. Who writes the story? We have to begin to write the story. We have to encourage our young boys and girls to go into writing. Whether they are writing about something small in their village in the past, whether they are having a collection of artifacts in the form of history, money from the government can help establish all of these museums in all regions or districts, why can't we organize educational tours from the north to Elmina, or from Elmina to the mosque in the north? These are things that money can be put aside by the government to address. In the Berlin conference, for instance, we lost our languages, but okay, the languages is what unites us. The languages does not divide us, because before the Europeans came, we were living together even though we spoke different languages. The indirect rule cemented the Eurocentric educational ideas that has led to the denigration of our Black race, and has actually laid useless the role of our chiefs as we currently experience. What can we do about that? Let us go back. Sankofa, it's not, the respect that we had for our chiefs is no longer there. And so the youth just go haywire. They no longer have control of themselves and their village. They do whatever they want. Education is what we can do. And that will be based on our curriculum to be able to steer us back in the right direction.
Good. Very good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, wonderful.
Great.
Can we have a clap for everybody? For them
Yes.
Yeah, good job, good job, good job.
Yeah,
Great. So at this point, we have comments and questions and all that. And we have our great chief, Nana Nketia here, who can also help us understand certain things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at this point, if Brother Nyan, you can help me identify people so that we can let them talk at the appropriate time.
Did Nana Kobranketia want to say something before we open the floor?
I'm learning.
Thank you. You said a lot.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay. Yes,
and I can see one Albert here. Is it Albert? Hello, Albert.
I think Nicholas has his hand up.
Okay.
Hello. Yeah. If people can introduce themselves whilst they ask questions, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that would be good too.
Yeah, please.
But what if they don't ask any questions?
Yeah.
Oh, later on, we should those who didn't introduce themselves should also introduce themselves so that we get to know who are attending here. Yeah. The Bulgar people in particular came very late. They have to introduce.
Okay, so who has the floor now? Is it Brother Nick?
Do I have the floor?
Yes.
Okay, let me express my appreciation to all the speakers. I'm particularly privileged to see Blanket staff who I haven't seen for a long time, a wealth of knowledge. I've chosen to intervene to try and see to what extent the conversation going forward would more closely mirror what Interim Chair Yen said. This is an important history lesson. It's about the past, about the present, but it's more importantly about the future. And it's about the future that our energies should be focused on. My intervention starts with the need to answer the question, who am I? Before we go to who are we? And where are we going? I've grouped the presentation into a number of themes to help me ask and answer the question or contribute to the reflection on what PAG can do going forward. Military conquest leads to subjugation of a people and enforces compliance. The destruction of self-worth and self-confidence through the damage done to our African values, language, and culture. Religion and consumables used to gain acceptance and prepare the ground for psychological and mental remolding. Control over our economic access and productive processes to facilitate extraction of wealth and leading to our impoverishment. Psychological remolding through education and control of information and information management systems. Creation of surrogate governance systems and leaders. Black skin, white mass. The question I ask, if we were to have this debate, if PAG were to reverse this process using these themes as anchors of reflection? How would we, for example, ensure that military conquest does not necessarily lead to a subjugation of the people? And I use that with intent because in the early years of the PNDC, I was in charge of political education in the military and the police. And I used to remind them why police and military do not hesitate to brutalize civilians. And if there's a soldier here, can correct me if I'm wrong, the insult, you are a bloody civilian. It was deliberately constructed to ensure that the West African Frontier Force, a pacification force, does not hesitate to inflict terror. So therefore, when you go through the remolding process and you come out of it and they send you to your own community, you wreak damage without any sense of guilt. The implication is that what do we do about what we call our military and police force? How do we change that orientation that has remained for us till today? The destruction of wealth and self-confidence through the damage of African values, language, and culture, I think I don't have authority to speak to this. Nana is the authority. So I would rather defer and not make any comment in that area. But I do think that it is absolutely important because as I said, I sometimes ask, who am I? All I can say is that I'm a complete mess. I can articulate in English. If I go to Bulgar and I'm talking, I cannot articulate this word. I mean, it's sad. Yeah. Who are we? I'm part of the tragedy that we have. Where are we going? I'm afraid we're still at it, and that's why we are here. Let me just stop here.
Great, fantastic. Thank you. Who is next?
Well, I'll let anybody.
Just unmute and talk, yeah, please.
Okay,
Daniel.
I listen. Listen.
Kwesi is on the floor.
Oh, okay, sorry, Brother Kwesi.
Well, well, I listen to all. I mean, all of us we listen to all of. But my question is, since we're all talking about curriculum and how we're going to have to go about it, are we talking about just school curriculum or curriculum for the nation? Because our challenge is not with the schools alone, okay, but with the operation who are in the leadership. So this is what I'm thinking about. Like a team, okay, like a team, a government is supposed to work as a team. Now, do we have to have a team who think together, understand the curriculum and work independently for the country, or do we still maintain the current administration that has been around since 100 years ago, before colonial days or during the colonial days, still working to implement the plans of the country? Okay, is it going to be better to set up a parallel organization, that think independently or can have a way forward, or are we going to still maintain the same curriculum that we're using in the ministries, in the institutions that we have today? Because if we're talking about curriculum, it's our institutions that are weak. I heard somebody talking about, the last speaker talking about the police and the something that he mentioned. These are the same systems we've been using for, so simply my question is, are we going to set up something that is more modern independently, or are we going to maintain, if you come into government, are we going to maintain the same ministries that we've been using that has not been productive for 100 years or since even independence? How do we go about that? It's something that I want to know an answer to. How do we, because Dr. Atta said about, okay, all of this internet something, and Nkrumah built fiber optic lines during the construction of the Akosombo Dam. And these lines, a president comes in and signs a contract with Vodafone or somebody, and they offer all of these national assets. Our telecommunication system has to be in the hands of the country. So for that to be in the hands of the country, you cannot just sign a contract by people who don't understand the importance of these assets to the nation. So what I'm asking is that, are we suppose PAG becomes a government? Is PAG also going to maintain the same status quo all of these governments have been using since after Nkrumah was overthrown?
Okay.
Or are we going to have
okay.
Yeah.
Great question.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a broad question, but let's focus on the fact that this is really about national orientation.
Okay.
And so Dr. Asola's point is that you have to start with the children right away when they are young, just like we were in the days of young pioneers when we were young, and that's why we are still doing what we are doing today. But you can, of course, I think what you are really talking about is more non-formal education outside of the classroom, which is for the community education. How do you, and community education is anything from women in the market, fishermen, farmers, police, different institutions. But the point is that the institutions themselves are not the issue. It is the orientation of the institutions, their origins, how they were built, what they were built for. Are they actually serving the community? So it's not so much the structures, but it has to do with function and how they function, and how we as an organization, as a political organization, begin political education of the population. I think that's really what it's about. Yeah, I mean, it can be done through existing institutions, you can create new institutions, but it's the content of what you are teaching people and how it is going to serve them to become better citizens, to have a better identity, have self-respect for themselves as Africans, and be productive in the African context. I think that's really the issue.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Who is next?
Yes, this is Dan. If I may, I think the way things are entrenched in our society for so long, at a certain point we have to cut our losses. We go in trying to change the mindset of people who are thinking about things that they've been doing for so many years, and we keep working trying to change it, and it doesn't, it gets us nowhere. At a certain point, you have to draw the line and saying this generation can't help them. We're going to build institutions for the children, okay, which is part of the education that Dr. Asola talked about. Let's start looking that way. Because if you go in right now and you go to a civil servant in Ghana and tell them, oh no, this is what has been in place, I want you to change, that's a difficult battle to win. So the institutions are there. If we're going to reorient them, that's great. But the effect and the results we're going to get should be geared towards the children. And that's where, to me, the education comes in. So if we set up a curriculum for education, right, not only are what Nkrumah had in place was perfect. The education system produced students who were not only cognizant and also could survive in the world, in the Western world, but also in the African world. And so far, it's a rudderless ship. It seems like, we don't know, we have foot in being able to survive in Western world, have foot, no. There's no reason why we can't do both. Educating our children, the education system needs to be able to have our children be cognizant and fluent in our culture, all right, in our nation and our culture, as well as in the Western world. Okay, teaching the child to understand, okay, the culture of his people, about why we do things, why we name things, the language and all that is just as important as being able to walk outside and go to the United Nations to give a good speech. Those are two things, and there's no reason why we can't do both. We've done it before, and we can't do it again. We just have to decide that that's what we're going to do and put the structures in place to do that. I think that's what will make us successful.
Great. Thank you, Brother Dan. Thank you
But
for that.
let me add a little something to what, the reason I brought out this question is that even if in our language, in some of our proverbs, we say, all of us know this. Okay, one bad nut spoils the entire broth. If we educate these children at this stage and they come into the same system that is corrupt, they are going to be corrupted. So Dan is saying, let's do both at the same time. I go with that. Okay, I go with that. But to emphasize on that education alone for the children and then they come out graduates into the same corrupt system, what is going to happen to that?
It will be the new system, my friend. They are people. That's the whole idea. You are creating new people to create a new system.
I also had, if I can come in,
Can I
moderator.
Can you? Yeah. Go ahead briefly. I mean.
Yes. We talked about the psychological effect of racism and the privileges and Europeanism in terms of creating the elitist group, classism, and all of that. We read about Trafalgar Square, the London Bridge, even before we knew about the rivers in Ghana or Yasantua Wars. What we are saying, Brother Bedu, is that if we know that many of our forefathers fought back, because people here do not know that they fought back during the slavery. They fought. There's no documentation to tell our young ones that we fought back. So cocoa farmers organized and fought back. Resistance was present. Then what prevents us from resisting the Eurocentric education that is inadvertently being supported by our governments without a conscious effort to critically examine what has worked in the past to build from there? That is why my conversation was based on the curriculum and its education. Thank you.
I also need to say something, please. Can I have
Sure, just a minute. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Linus Atara. I live in Finland. I just want to make a quick intervention on these institutions and curriculum and so on that we've been talking about. You know, somebody asked the question whether shall we, when in power, shall we create new institutions or use the ones that have been there for a long time and have served us not so well up to now? Well, first of all, I think institutions are just empty vessels. You know, just the people who are made to fill in these vessels that determine the way institutions would go. That also in turn depends on the program that a coming government will design on how for the institutions to work.
Exactly.
Now, from here, I'll then move on to this. Given in this connection, if we are going to find a proper curriculum, first of all, in my opinion, I think that we need, in order to be able to design a proper curriculum that meets, school curriculum that would meet our needs, would be first of all to decentralize the curriculum designing thing. Now in Ghana, the curriculum is, comes from all the way from the central education, the central Ministry of Education. There is no reason why we cannot decentralize this. Over here in Finland, that's how I talk. Schools are design their own curriculum, and yet they somehow align with the overall education system, and it works perfectly. Finland has unquestionably the best education system in the world.
Yeah, that's right.
To learn about how to go and run their own schools. And one central element that has been found is that the curriculum is not centrally determined. It is done by actually schools. And then the overall system is made to align with each other. Now, how we have this system, if we're able to move away from this centralized curriculum writing or how do I put this? If we're able to move away from this, then we would then be able to, it would be easy to find, first of all, the participation, the people who would participate in making this curriculum would be easier to identify. And then we shall find out who are the people who are specialized in various, who are knowledgeable in various subjects, history, mathematics, this and that, English, languages, whatever, and then bring them and assemble them. And then as a pool of resource that we can then use to design our curriculum. All of this can be done for all schools in Ghana. I mean, by the various regions and by the various districts. It doesn't have to come from a central source. And in fact, the central source is, to me, primarily why we have this, the kind of education system that we are now questioning. So this is one thing that I would like to point out.
Great. Thank you so much. We know Finland is leading in terms of education curriculum, so we will tap on your knowledge when the time comes.
Education that that serves everybody, and it's like, yeah.
Great. Nice to see you, Brother Albert.
Oh yeah, Amanfo, thanks for inviting me. Yes. I'm just soaking in.
Great. Thank you.
Can I
Nana?
Yeah.
I think Albert was talking.
Nana wants to speak.
Oh, okay,
let
sure.
Speak first, please.
Nana, go ahead.
Oh, no, I mean, if you want to speak. I mean, I'm also soaking in as well. But I think a lot has, there's a lot, based on my personal experience on the ground. For example, I taught a course in Cape Coast University to do with post-independent Ghana, so-called independent Ghana. The class was devastated when, based on where I was coming from, I just told them what Ghana is, and they couldn't believe it. Now we talk about central theory, forget about things like Gramsci's hegemony, the whole idea of hegemony. Who wants to control, who wants to manipulate the psychology of the states and move it in a particular direction? And so these are the things we need to consider. When you're talking about institutions, the police were made, the police and the army were made to coerce the people in the ground. Mm-hmm. We are still living in what the Latin Americans call it today, the colonized, we are colonial beings. We still haven't gotten out of that whole colonial set. If you had when Dr. Kojato was speaking, I was sitting here smiling, just that it was even opening more for me to understand what is up. I didn't know that Killick, for example, was that horrible. So when he spoke about Killick, I said, this is really devastating. And so it was just enriching what I had. Now you cannot fight the system just going bashing that you want this, you want. No, I have tried here in Sekondi. I have tried to create, okay, let me go back to some young people. When we had African Liberation Day, we used this as a day for bringing people together, students together and talking to them about what Africa is about what Ghana is about. Teachers were not too happy, but they used me as the flag to get the students to come in. And we brought other people to come and speak for them. So that was a way out. Now we have Constitution Day. Am I going to tell them that, go there and tell them, tell them that we have a microwave constitution of British and European when I'm African, and confuse them more. Now we've chucked, what is the name of the day? We've chucked Republic Day. What was the meaning of the word republic in the first place? And now we claim we have a Republic Day. Am I going to tell them that in 1897, the Aborigines Right Protection Society, for example, under Queen Victoria, will say that for the safety of the Republic and so on and so forth, and explain what we may understand by the word Republic? There's so many things wrong with the system, but the biggest and the most problematic thing is the whole idea of hegemony. We need to create vehicles that what do you call it, not formalized. When Thad was talking about Nkrumah's period and spoke about the young pioneers, do you remember that there was the African personality children too there? Some of whom I've met and they've spoken to me about the Congo and so on, and I've gone back and asked them, how can you know that at that time? And they would tell me the African personality thing. Now, I always say, let's go back to the most important speech ever made in Africa. And that is the fifth of my Eve of Independence speech. We've never analyzed it. And when you analyze it, that is where we should take the seed from. You could see the experience Nkrumah had, and don't think that there were no people there. Nkrumah came to awaken us in a particular direction, which we don't want to accept. He came to awaken us, and then after that, we went back to sleep. So you need these vehicles, but I don't think that we even went back to sleep. We slept
We were
in comas.
anesthetized. We were anesthetized. We didn't go back to sleep.
So let us move forward is that we need to create vehicles in which the knowledge that you are sharing here can be taken to the people to think about as critical beings. Dr. Arthur, you remember that when I came back into the UNESCO thing that we did about 4 days ago, I deliberately, what's the name of that thing? I deliberately defined education. And I always say that all education is indoctrination. The best indoctrination is indoctrination that makes you aware of indoctrination. And then I went on to talk about indigenous education and what it tried to inculcate in people. We don't have anything inculcating anything into us. What makes us Ghanaian? When the young man was talking about boarding schools, for example, he forgets that in Fasuma, Adesadel, Augustans were not made by Nkrumah. And if you read Freeman wanted boarding schools because that was the nursery for them to create the kind of Christianized Africans they wanted. It wasn't in the interest of the people. So boarding school wasn't an Nkrumah idea, but we've benefited from it one way or the other, and that comes out of the Saba reaction and so on. So we need, as a group right now, to think there are heritage clubs within the which you can form. Do we want to go ahead and create heritage clubs, and then the knowledge we have here, the psychology we have here, put it into the minds of the people? North Korea is having COVID. When people ask them, do you want help? They said, no. I understood it. We would have said, yeah, bring us all the help, because they are fighting for self-reliance. And we don't see it. What did IMF give to China, or World Bank give to China for the Chinese to stand on their feet? And yet we have our budgets, and every time we are stupidly talking about donor support, donor support, donor support. When an organism wants donors, it means the organism is very, very sick. So it's the whole putting into the people, the psychology. Look, I'm working on 2 things right now, and I've left one and that one is related to what Dr. Arthur was saying. And I realized that I was going too far back, that when Pope Urban was going to urging the people to go for the, what's the name of it? For the Crusades. What he told the Europeans is still on today. It hasn't changed. When they came to Africa, they had a mind. What did Europe come to Africa for? Has it changed?
No.
Building the castles and so on, looking for ways and means. They've always had a mind of taking things from us. But we are not aware. So it's a psychology. It's a psychology. And Thad is probably one of the best guys that we have. How many of us have picked up Naim Akbar? How many of us will pick up Amos Wilson to read? If you pick up Clark, we're going to have a Clark conference soon. I keep on asking, please, the young ones, read Clark, because we want you to take part in this conference, not of an African World Revolution, among other things. So there's enough material, most especially in the Western world, most especially with Thad and his people. The whole idea of Wade Nobles seeking the Saku and so on. But what are we doing here? We're doing absolutely nothing. All that we want is that Dankwa brought Ghana, this man did this, and so on. As stupid as we can get stupider. So let's get real.
Exactly.
Let's create heritage vehicles, because it is there within the cultural policy. And look for ways and means of sustaining these. Then you are working within the system to change the system. But if you come out, boom, you won't get anywhere, because the system as it is benefits certain people. We've created certain privileged groups with the kind of history and psychology we are carrying. Why would I go and stand on the roadside and go and vote for somebody who is going to get the latest Lexus and then come with Cyrus? Is there something wrong with my head? This is insane. And as he talked about, and Dr. Arthur, you remember that we have to go into trauma, not just one trauma, the trauma of slavery, the trauma of colonialism, the trauma of neocolonialism. This is a traumatized continent.
Yeah.
And Ghana probably can get out of it if we wake up. If Dr. Thad will remember, when the witches came, the witch thing came into Ghana at a point, they were asking some of them in Accra, how do you get from A to B? So we are going on telegraph poles. You know, when the Brunner study, if you remember, on witchcraft, you can see that here were people who didn't understand what was happening to them. The changes were such that they didn't understand. So right now, look at last week, the whole of Ghana, they going for an election, and what were they thinking about? Oh, Papa No or something. Such stupid trivialities.
No, Papa No.
Elections about my future. And you're thinking about who has slept with whom, who has done what with what. Yeah, but you know, and I think here, being a chief, you have to be careful with your words, because as you say, we have people that you also have to find ways and means of walking in between the fine lines. When you're talking about apartheid, how many Ghanaians know that apartheid was being instituted in this country?
That's right.
How many?
Yeah. That's what I meant about the racism of colonialism.
That father was involved in some of these things. Where I live in Sekendi right now was a whites-only area. My mother would tell me that when we come here, dogs chase us.
Yeah, I remember that in Accra.
My mother, no, here in Sekendi. The beach that has been turned into a fishing harbor. When a white man goes into the sea, is about to go to the sea, all the black people must leave.
You have to come out.
Beach, sea.
Yeah.
Don't let me use the MF words. This is not a room for it. But either we get out and put a vehicle there and use the same vehicle they had. You can't change the curriculum, because at the moment it is in the interest of those of the power groups to maintain it. Last year, I gave a talk here in Sekendi using the same thing, Independence Day. We brought several schools together. The whole place was dead quiet after I spoke for 2 hours. Then one little girl got up and asked me a very simple question. He said, "Sir, what about the big six?" Then I answered, "You see, I'm here in Sekendi and I was telling you about Sekendi. Go and ask those in Accra." And I deliberately said that to wriggle myself out of another history of the struggle that they didn't know and hasn't been written. The real history. You know, I defined struggle for them and then started talking, etc. Ended up, and the whole place was dead. One of the headmistresses or something got up and said, "When this man speaks, I get scared." And she gets scared because I'm speaking English.
Yeah.
And I seem to be undermining everything that they have, psychologically undermining everything they've been taught. So let's use the heritage clubs and see what we put. And even if we make one child, 1, 2 children think correctly, believe you me, we're on the way on. It's not, we are then reversing the Abia syndrome, that one good nut is going to help affect the rest of the nuts.
The bad nuts, yeah.
So I think.
But can we? I mean, Anthony, if you can encourage the younger people, because the future is for them.
That's right. Yeah.
Do you see it? So they should come in. There are quite a couple of young people here.
Yeah.
Most of us are.
Yeah.
Well, I don't like to use the word. So
yeah,
please, can the younger people also we want to know what you think, about these issues.
What they've heard, what they've learned today.
Yeah. So the young, you mean under 40?
Yeah, under 40, yeah.
Okay.
Under 50. Under 50.
You have Fanel, you have Ibrahim. Some have gone off. I think maybe the Ghana.
Edwina.
The Bulgarian people have gone off. Yeah.
Are they still on?
Yes, Daniel is young. Yeah. You are young enough, so.
Okay, so who wants to go?
Daniel, you want to say something?
If he doesn't, I want to say something.
Yeah, he's raised his hand. Unmute, Daniel. Unmute.
Yeah, click on your mute.
Yeah.
Right.
Senator Fusubaku says his hand has been up for a while too.
I've been unmuted.
Moderator.
Yeah, you are unmuted.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you're on the floor.
Daniel, can you?
Daniel, go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I've not raised my hand, please.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yes. It's because you are talking about the youth. That's what I unmuted my screen so that you see that the youth are still around.
Can you say something? Do you want to say something?
All right. For me to say something concerning everything that I've heard is it's like I'm a language student, and I think our language too is something that will is a problem. Like right now, as we are, like we don't want to learn our own language. As I'm a student of a language, I'm a language student in the University of Education, and people have been like they've been making a mockery on me that I'm learning my own language. Where am I sending it to? How am I going to get an employment after completion? And I say, so imagine our own people are saying this. So how then will the Europeans or the whites even respect us, as we ourselves don't respect our own culture, we don't respect our own language? How then do you think the white will respect us? As at now, the whites still respect us because we have natural resources. And the time that those natural resources will be out of Africa, then they will not even give us an iota of respect as they give us right now. They can still get gold from our continent. They can still get timber from our continent and other minerals from our continent. But at the point of time that they will not get those things, then we are doomed. They will not even get any an iota of respect from them. So we should try then maybe encourage ourselves to engage in our own culture than trying to bring the foreign culture more than our own. That's the little I have to say. And if yes,
fantastic. Yeah, that's a good contribution.
Okay.
Yeah, who is next?
Thank you.
I would like to say something a bit on this language thing. Hello.
Oh, can somebody? Excuse me. Excuse me. Hold on. Is Edwina online? Edwina?
She hasn't said no. Maybe
Okay.
ask Fanan.
Okay, Fanan.
Or meet Fanan.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
What I want to say is that about 2 years ago, Dr. Nicholas Atampugri with SJM, we decided to set up what we call current affairs club in all the second cycle institutions, that is a secondary school all over the country. That was our idea. So we wrote to some few schools in Accra that we wanted to organize that kind of current affairs where we will be talking about topical issues, that's history, like some of the topics that was covered today, colonialism, neo-colonialism, and things like that. But unfortunately, the politicians couldn't allow such things to go on in the secondary schools. They said headmasters shouldn't allow people to organize such things for the students. So my short submission I want to do over here is I'm in support of Nana Nketia, who is calling for establishment of heritage club. I want those that heritage club to be formed so that we'll be able to teach our young ones and also refresh ourselves. That's all that I want to say.
Thank you, Fernando.
Okay. So let me just interject. I'm sorry that I have to come in again.
Do we have Phyllis here? Phyllis?
Actually, the cultural policy mandates that they should be encouraged to be formed in the schools. It's part of Ghana's cultural policy, but you should do it in such a way. If you get teachers or head teachers who motivate the students or get students who be motivated to form them, then they can invite people to come in and talk to them. That is one way out. But if not, then it becomes very difficult because of the status quo. But it is within the cultural policy. And also Article 6 of our present constitution, no matter how bad it is, encourages these kind of things. So you can look at it from that end. As for the community things, if you go to the articles that deal with chieftaincy, they are there, but it's only mere talk, because at the end of the day, the chiefs don't control any form of education within their districts and so on. But it's through these heritage clubs that you can find ways and means of getting in there, getting into the school system. Otherwise, they have to be done outside the school system.
I have a short question for Nana, since you are on. This heritage club that you're suggesting, should it be part of the school curriculum, or like we had in high schools, debating club, history club?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, they come in there. But this one, if the Commission on Culture were very serious, it would then even force the schools to do it, because it is part of the present Ghana cultural policy. The government must encourage the formation of these clubs in the schools. But it just like almost everything, they've just become pieces of paper. So if there's a way we could activate it, then you'll be working in the system to have these things done. We did that cultural policy together with Professor Hagen at the time. And I hear that this guy, there was a guy who was in charge of culture during Jerry's time. He used to be at the African Studies. He's now in the States. He's not feeling too well. So he's with a daughter in the States. I hear his cultural policy was even much more drastic than the one that we did. Ours was mild. How can I forget this guy?
Anthony, is it possible, Anthony? Is it possible for you to be drawing these things towards a close so that people don't vote? Yeah, because some people have voted and left already. Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me? I would like to say something.
You have a minute, please.
Are you able to hear me? I would like to say something.
Yeah, a minute. Yeah, go ahead.
Is that okay? Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. What I want to, I support a lot of what has been said, and particularly most recently about this thing about heritage clubs and so on and so forth. What I would like to say is this, that back in 1980, somebody called Ngugi wa Thiong'o talked about what Africans needed to do, which was to decolonize their minds. And I think that a lot of what has been said here lends support to that proposition. And we need to do it in a systematic way. There's the mind, there's the economy, there's politics, there's culture, there's education, there's science, there's philosophy, there's language, all of which need to be decolonized. And I think that those who are experts in fields should take themselves to develop a proper program as to how to do this. So that's a general statement. I want to make just one statement about the economies, which is something I'm concerned with a little. So before that, just one statement that we need to think as Africans about our place in the world. That should be our primary objective. How are we located in the world, and what do we intend to do about it? I know we have our own internal quarrels and differences and so on and so forth, but really our position in the world is what matters, because the world is certainly looking at our position and how it can be exploited further. Okay, so we need all of us to sort of lift up our game to that level, to that status. The last thing I want to say, as I said, is about the economy. We know we have a colonial economy that was structured, but we are not paying enough attention to decolonizing the economy. We're not paying enough attention to what keeps our economies the way they were created by the colonial system. We have willingly gone into international fora, which are designed to keep our economies the way colonialism created them. I will not go into detail, but I'll mention just specifically the World Trade Organization. This organization is designed to keep our economies structured the way they continue to be. Why? For the simple reason that it says that we must treat all economies, and no matter where they come from, the same as our own. But we have lived through 400 years where our economies were not treated advantageously. In fact, they were treated disadvantageously. And now we've gone into a system where we are going to treat everybody else the same. We accept it, and we willingly go through that system. We should not do this. We need to restructure the economic relationship between us and the rest of the world. And we need to make that a serious agenda item. We haven't really begun to do that at all. And nobody is really speaking about it with the kind of passion that we should be speaking about it. Secondly, the economic system that colonialism created channeled our energy and labor so that it would be it will be as least productive as possible. It has been mentioned about the importance of education. We need to find a way to make ourselves as productive as possible. This should be one of our key objectives. And the third thing is that the businesses that we have that exist in our countries, as African countries, should, as much as possible, in fact, I would say exclusively, but that's not really possible, they should be owned by ourselves. The idea of everybody here will know that, for example, African Ghanaian farmers, chicken producers, people producing different kinds of meat, have had problems with our governments opening our economies and allowing foreign companies to either import or to establish within our terrain. This is not how European countries developed. There's plenty of literature on this. We need to be economic nationalists. We cannot be internationalists. We will not develop that way. And I just want to finish with one example on a country that in Africa that is economically nationalistic in a way that I think we should learn from. Ethiopia does not belong to the WTO. Ethiopia does not have to open its economy if it doesn't want to. Ethiopia has shown that to build this dam, which they have just built, they didn't go to the IMF or the World Bank to get the money. They issued bonds inside Ethiopia, $5.5 billion worth of bonds. Yes? And then they decided who they wanted to build it. If they were part of WTO, they would have to open it to the whole world. They didn't. They said, we raised our own money and we know who we want to build this thing. When Egypt decided that it was going to use its friend in Washington to try to disorganize the Ethiopians, they found that there was nothing they could use to leverage against the Ethiopians. Why? Because the money was their own and they're not part of WTO. They don't have to obey those rules. Unless we learn economic nationalism, we shall not progress.
Yeah, thank you, brother. Thank you so much. Yeah, very, very good contribution. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, briefly.
Yeah, several issues have been raised.
Please.
I will support Nana's suggestion that we form heritage clubs or something else. The 1940s and 50s saw the establishment of what they call literary clubs, which were used to invite prominent people to speak to them and politicize them. Help intensify their understanding of what was going on. And these literary clubs, as well as what used to be called town development associations, became the basis for the formation of CPP, because it was mostly young people in these clubs who wanted change. And therefore, when the UGCC rejected the idea of the Committee on Youth Organizations being co-opted as the youth wing of the UGCC, they broke away to form the CPP. So, those times, they didn't have access to radio, television. They had their own newspapers. But now we have radios, television stations, and what stops us from going to some of these stations? Many of them are looking for programs anyway. I remember Radio Peace in Winnipeg.
If you can run up for us, please.
Okay.
I want many people to talk. That's right. Yeah.
We need to take advantage of organizations like the Heritage Club to reach out to people to raise their awareness, educate them. And the language issue, the young man who is the student of education, language, I would suggest that if he's at Ejumako, come in touch with me. I need several few people to begin to write in your own languages, history of your area, different things that go on in your area. I will need somebody from Navrongo area talk about the Sirigu women's cooperative and what they do with their artwork. For example,
okay.
I'll need some people to look into indigenous herbal and plant medicines.
Okay.
Document this. We need to document.
Right. Dr. Arthur, I think your time is up, please.
Okay.
Okay.
Linus, your time.
1 minute, please.
Unmute, sorry.
Yeah. Phyllis also has a hand up.
No, Linus is on, but
okay.
He hasn't muted his mic.
Okay. Who is Linus?
Linus, he's on there.
Okay, let's try Phyllis. Phyllis,
yeah,
go on.
Okay.
Hello, Phyllis.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, shoot.
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Phyllis.
Can you unmute her?
herself?
Yeah, she unmuted herself.
Yeah.
I mean, she muted herself, rather.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's not working.
Speak.
Hello.
Yes.
We can hear you. Please speak.
Go ahead.
She's muted it again.
Yeah, she has, yeah.
On mute.
And the same thing happened to Linus. He also, muted himself.
Please, unmute yourself, please.
I'm trying it from here.
Yeah, you should be able to unmute her.
Yeah, I
Control
did.
her.
I did twice.
It's done now.
Okay, I got
now.
it.
Phyllis,
okay, go ahead, Phyllis. Yeah.
Hello.
Yes, hello.
We hear you.
This is not. I don't know what's going on.
We hear you. It's working.
Just go.
hear you.
Don't do anything. Just speak.
Hello?
Just talk. We can hear you. Just talk.
Something isn't working. I don't know why.
We can hear you. We can hear you. Just talk, please.
Okay.
I don't think she can hear us. That's
Yeah, maybe that's the problem. Yeah. Okay, let's move on.
Linus, we see Linus talking, but Linus.
Yeah, he also muted himself.
No.
Where is Linus?
Linus, he's on there, but now he's muted himself. Okay, he's unmuted, but we can't hear him. No, we can't hear him.
Yeah, but in Phyllis's case, we can hear the background. So why can't we hear?
She doesn't hear us.
Ah.
Yeah. Linus, unmute yourself.
He's unmuted, but
which one is Linus?
Linus, go on two on the side of Brother Yen. To the side of Brother Yen.
Yeah.
To the side of Brother Yen. Oh, right here.
Yeah, unmute him.
Okay.
Okay, Brother
Linus, go ahead.
Go ahead. The same issue. Yeah.
I think it has to do with his microphone.
Yeah.
If you
Your
went
mic
to their
is not
home,
good.
he cooked lots of food and that sort of thing. So she learned those.
Dan, can you send him a text message, Dan, please?
Phyllis has unmuted. Phyllis, have to mute.
Hello. I don't know.
Hello, Phyllis.
It's not working.
Hello, Phyllis.
Okay.
Huh.
Anthony, you've done your best. So
Okay,
please,
so we shift to somebody else.
Yeah,
Shift
yeah.
to somebody else.
Can we, if nobody has,
Edwina, are you there?
I just wanted to give a shout out to everybody and to just bring the female presence into the whole
thank you.
Process. I've been taking it all in.
Yeah.
And I also very much support Nanange's suggestion of the heritage clubs. So, and a shout out to Nana. I'm from Ghana, by the way. Anyway, so I'll leave it there because I can't get a feedback. So I hope you're hearing me when I'm speaking. And I think this is very, very good process that we're going through. And hopefully there'll be many more.
Yeah, there certainly will be many more.
Next time will be better.
Yeah.
I'll be able to speak both ways, hopefully.
You will.
Great. Albert, you have something to say today?
I'll say comment the speakers very well as a contributor. One thing
brother Kofi, can you unmute where the noise is coming in Phoenix Hot?
Actually, I just muted.
Okay,
yeah,
good. Go ahead.
I would add is that yes, they said that it is the hunter who actually writes the story. Otherwise, you hear many more different stories from the lion who's being preyed on. So one thing is, yes, I don't know about what the heritage centers are about, but we have to start to be able to write. We have to be able to start to write. I've been on a forum with other people. We have to be able to write and compete with other ideas out there. So it is up to us, whether we are literal experts or non-experts, be able to contribute to the public discussion as to exactly what our history is and where we have to go. So that's all I have to say. We have to find a way to be able to write for the future generation. It is Albert Banahini. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Albert. Brother Kofi, can you unmute Linus? Because he wants to.
Actually, no, he's unmuted.
He's unmuted, but we are not hearing him. He's
okay, we spent 2.5 hours here.
Yeah,
we spent 2.5 hours.
That's right. Who again wants to speak?
I think we should be rounding off now because we will end up discouraging participation if we take so long.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's been nice hearing from all of you. We do this every other week.
Yeah.
And so we'll be informing you of our next topic and discussion topic and all that. So please invite others as well. At this point, I would like to hand over to our chairman, Thad, to give us a parting word, please.
Remarks. Yeah.
You're assuming that your chairman is awake. But anyway, after it went on for so long, thanks to everybody. I believe that this is a very first step in something that will grow. This is our second one, and we've had more participation. We probably have to find a way to support the involvement of the folks in Ghana. Maybe some material support to allow them to stay on for the whole conference. But I, like everyone, enjoyed it and feel that ideas are coming out of this, which we can implement on the ground to help us reach our final goal. So I think Nana's idea of the heritage clubs is a good one as we go through the districts to begin to find individuals that we can give this responsibility to across the country. And we can then provide them with a curriculum that they can discuss at the local level. So I'm already beginning to see a systematic way in which we can follow up on some of the ideas that have come up today.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and also all the speakers and indeed all the participants. Thank you very much. Okay, bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you, Brother Thad. Yeah. So thank you all. Stay safe and remain blessed. Yeah, stay safe.
Okay.
Was this recorded?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Arthur. Bye-bye.
Thank you. I'll get
All
it.
right.
Okay.
But it
Right.
excites me. The possibility of it excites me.
Ms. Phyllis, how was the Western region?
Eugene, let me have your email address, please.
Ms. Phyllis.
Email is
Kujata, I can get you Eugene's number, email address.
BOURNE.
Okay.
Can you hear?
I'll send it to him. I'll send it to him.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll send it to him.
Yeah.
I was asking you, how was your trip to the Western region?
It's muted.
Oh, I see. Okay. I thought I asked to unmute.
So, Brother Nyen, can I ask a
Yeah.
quick question here?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
It doesn't go to ways for some reason.
Yeah.
Is there a way we can help facilitate what do you call
I'm having
attendance,
lots of challenges. So
The people-
welcome again.
Yeah, the
we'll do it
people, you
again.
know, because the mics, it's something we have no control over, isn't it?
Yeah, the mics, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the thing to do is to, like in Bolga, I think they come and use 1 or 2 computers. And then they're there also making, it's open. I think they use computer. I don't know whether, I think the other laptop or computers, and that is the problem. They put it on, so they list noise. But I'm not there, so I really don't know what is happening. But